Shalom, and welcome to the second program of a special three-part Talking Memory series, Invisible Years. In today's program, we'll focus on hiding places. My name is Medin Shahar, and I work at the Ghetto Fighters House as an educator and as a guide. I want to welcome our global audience, including friends and colleagues from Holocaust museums, institutions, and centers, Jewish heritage institutions, academics and students from universities, historians, and our many, many friends who attend our Talking Memory series. A special welcome, as always, to the survivors and their families that are with us today, especially the Dzute descendants and their families. We want to thank everyone for their support and interest in our programs. Today's program is in partnership with our dear, dear friends at the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation, the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation in South Africa, and Classrooms Without Borders. The inspiration for this series is the captivating memoir, Invisible Years, a family's collected account of separation and survival during the Holocaust in the Netherlands that was designed and written by Daphne Geisner. In today's program, we will focus on hiding places in the Netherlands during the Holocaust. Professor Dienke Hondius will present her Mapping Hiding Places project, focusing on hiding in the Netherlands, including the 27 hiding places of the family in Invisible Years. And Professor Kiene Brillenburg Wurth will focus on one hiding place, the Breeplein Church in Rotterdam, where her grandparents risked their lives to hide Fifi and Chaim de Zoete. The Ghetto Fighters House, our partners, and the descendants of the de Zoete family are so honored that the Mayor of Rotterdam, Mr. Ahmed Aboutaleb, agreed to give the opening remarks for today's program. Unfortunately, the Mayor could not attend the program and has kindly sent a recorded message.
Of course, I had to take a dive in its history. The history of the city that is connected with the Second World War. The entire downtown of the city has been demolished. Nothing was left except the beautiful city hall and a number of other buildings. The story is painful. 11,000 Jewish people have been brought to camps somewhere in the east of the Netherlands, and after that brought to camps in Holland. And unfortunately, a lot of them died in the camps. But there are also beautiful stories connected with the war, stories of humanity. Citizens of Rotterdam were helped to hide Jewish citizens in many places, and I have a lot of stories. One of the surprises that I discovered was the fact that two Jewish families, had been hiding in a church behind an organ. Behind an organ, where in the church every Saturday music was played. Can you imagine what does it mean? Can you imagine what it means in the 40s to spend 36 months behind an organ, cold, with little food? And one of these families, one of the women was pregnant and delivered the baby behind an organ. The people involved in the church took the baby away because the baby made noise. And as the Germans entered the church, which they did for a couple of times, then people become vulnerable. So the baby was brought to another place to hide. The other family, Familie de Zoete, was also behind the organ. And they were there as a couple with three daughters, go to other families to hide in the city. And funny enough, they had sometimes the luck to see the daughters playing outside the church. War is one of the most dark things human beings designed. And the Second World War was extremely in that definition, designed by one man to kill one type of citizens. Also other vulnerable people like the gypsies and homosexuals, but mainly the Jewish people. It is a design war, a thing that you cannot compare with other types of war when it comes to taking a piece of land or whatever. It's learning us something about humanity. It's learning us sometimes about how important it is that we help vulnerable people nowadays. There's a lot of refugees everywhere in the world. And not only in the West. The most refugees are in Africa and Latin America. They survive with little food a day. A war tells us something about us as human beings. And the church was a fascinating symbol. And now I know there is a dispute about the future of the church and how to deal with such an iconic place, of which I would like that it never disappear as mayor of the city. That is a piece of history we have to safeguard. I know there is a dispute among a group of people to the left and to the right. My advice to them is, please mobilize wisdom. There is something in between your rationale and the fight to have your own opinion done. And sometimes there is something as what I call consciousness and wisdom that's behind any objective. Keep it alive.
I have to say that the mayor gave such an important message, and maybe I'm glad that we got to hear it twice. And we are so glad that he is making sure that the history of the Holocaust in Rotterdam is forever remembered. And now I would like to invite our first speaker. Dr. Dienke Hondius is Assistant Professor of Contemporary and Political History at the Vrije University in Amsterdam, Faculty of Humanities, staff member at the Anne Frank House, co-chair of the Oral History Commission, Huizinga Institute of Humanities Research in Utrecht, member of the Jewish Studies Commission of the Menashe Ben Israel Institute in Amsterdam, and Ida E. King Distinguished Visiting Professor of Holocaust Studies at Stockton University in the United States. At the Anne Frank House, she helped to establish the international department by making international traveling exhibits in many countries. She has published extensively in the broad field of Holocaust studies and anti-Semitism on the one hand, and on race, racism, and slavery studies on the other. She combines teaching and research and is also active in the field of oral history and memory studies. Mapping Hiding Places is her research project, building maps with information about locations where Jews had been hiding during the Showa in Europe. This international research initiative stimulates a new focus on the history of Jews in hiding during World War II. She has presented her research in the United States, Israel, France, and Greece. And I would like to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Madine, and thank you very much for having me. I'm going to share my screen and my PowerPoint right away, because I'm very happy that we were able to listen to Mayor Aboutaleb, and it's a pity that he's not here. He's a fantastic ally in the struggle against anti-Semitism and racism. So it's, I think it's a very good choice to have him open this program. I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to guide you through a long PowerPoint, but I have shortened it, and my focus is on hiding places as smart networks of solidarity, but also of a Jewish agency and trauma and a very complex memory. Let me start. Yes, this is better. So today I'm going to talk about these topics, how hiding started earlier than we tend to think, how it has been overlooked in research and in commemoration practice. I'm going to show you some new research results, some new figures and findings, some new visual options and tools that we are using, and we'll end with some information about next steps and invite you to become a part of this research project, because I know that there are so many people here who have direct and indirect experience of hiding histories, and I look forward to hearing from you. Well, this is our meeting, of course, and to start, I would like to say that it's 83 years after Kristallnacht, and we have to think about that was an outbreak of anti-Jewish violence, and the reason for a lot of Jewish people to leave Germany and Austria, of course. And anti-Jewish violence was a reason to begin a form of what we could also call hiding. Because how did hiding begin? Anti-Jewish violence was in many different forms, was a starting point for that. In 1938, a lot of Jewish homes and synagogues and community buildings were damaged or taken, occupied. Many Jews were arrested. And there was not a lot of non-Jewish reactions to that. There was a lot of passivity. Saul Friedlander has reminded us that there was hardly solidarity with the attacked Jews. So you can say that hiding in a way starts spontaneously, and help was exceptional. When we go even earlier to the beginning of the 1930s, we see that for Jewish socialists and communists and for trade union workers, escape and hiding networks were already started in the early 1930s. So that is a type of hiding that I would like to also include in the story. When we look outside Germany and Austria, for instance, in Antwerp, in Belgium, we see that there are also outbursts of anti-Jewish violence already in 1941. And indeed, in Amsterdam, there was also anti-Jewish violence. I have worked with my students, both in the US and in Amsterdam, on making maps, and I have the students work on research assignments, and then we make a map of hiding places. This is just a starting point of finding different hiding places in different countries. So students were engaged in that, and Remco de Boer, a research assistant, helped with making these first maps last year. Among my earlier work was a study of how Holocaust survivors returned to the Netherlands in 1945. And so this is, for example, a woman returning from Bergen-Belsen. And the focus, I must say, was always on returning from the camps. And there was much less focus on returning from hiding. And I now think that it is time for looking much more at what hiding consisted of and what also was returning from hiding meant. So that's something that we haven't looked at yet. In my earlier study, I looked at returning Jewish survivors, looked at various forms of anti-Semitism and strengths of anti-Semitism, especially in the summer of 1945. Very difficult situations where non-Jews refused to return Jewish property, very harsh institutions in the Netherlands, for instance, the banks and the insurance companies, and a small Jewish community of survivors who was severely in trauma and severely in mourning. And in that and outside that community were silencing mechanisms. So there was the voice of the Jewish survivors was not heard for a long time. When we look at the situation of survivors returning from hiding places, there are some extra things happening that we have to look at. For instance, there are complex relations among surviving family members, especially when there were family members who returned from hiding and returned from the camps. It appears that there has been a kind of hierarchy among surviving family members, and that had a silencing effect on survivors also. People who returned from hiding were expected to be grateful, and that gratitude also, yeah, it's now 83 years ago, no, 76 years ago since the liberation. So that expectation and that practice and continuation of gratitude is also something very specific for survivors of hiding. And then there are the fights over children, over property, and over governance among the survivors of hiding that they had to deal with. So these are some of the specific things that survivors of hiding have been confronted with. When we talk about hiding, the onderduik, as we say in Dutch, it seems to be an easy thing. Even children can understand hide and seek, but in fact it was quite complicated. It was a hard decision to go into hiding. It was very hard to find and to ask for a hiding place. It was quite difficult to keep a hiding place and to keep relations between Jews and non-Jews bearable, and also among the people who were inside the hiding place. Of course, there was the uncertainty that you never knew for how long this was going to take. And so special skills were needed. You needed to be inventive, courageous, you had to take risks, had to be creative. You had to be able to keep a secret. You had to be able to deal with the emotions and all the practicalities. And what we now see is that hiding has hardly been discussed or studied by scholars in depth. So it is, strangely enough, it is still for scholars an almost new topic. As I said, that some forms of hiding began long before the deportations. Our example is Anne Frank. When Anne Frank received a call up for, or her sister Margot received a call up for deportation, the next day they went into hiding. This is not always how it went. There were very different moments and situations where people decided to go into hiding or found a form of shelter. And as I said, for some people that started already in 1933. Another group, many Jewish refugees moved on to the Netherlands, from the Netherlands, further away to the UK, to the US, to Australia, to Central and Latin America and the Caribbean. And then there were people who were able to flight and leave the country to Belgium, France, and on to Spain and Portugal. I find it important to realize that in 1941, there were already quite a few Jewish men who began to go into hiding every now and then. Rian Verhoeven, my colleague historian in Amsterdam, has written a book about Merwedeplein, a square where the Frank family were also living. And she noted that in 1941, Jewish men who were very alarmed about the razzia in 1941 and the death announcements coming in from Mauthausen, began to sleep elsewhere. They would leave the house in the evening and sleep somewhere else because they were very afraid of the rumors of the next possible wave of arrests. So that is also a moment when hiding starts. Now, what is hiding? It's a form of resistance, trying to escape deportation, arrest, refusing to register for work in the East, as it was called, and included in resistance. And we now think of resistance as a very broad topic. It is not, resistance is no longer only the sort of military or armed resistance. No, we include in resistance all the acts, passive and active, that go against the will of the Nazis. Now, what was the will of the Nazis? The aim of the Nazis was, as Alan Confino has said, to have a world without Jews. Now, consequently, every Jew who stays alive and he helps others to stay alive resists the Nazi aim. So that means that resistance is a kind of spectrum, and we have to recognize all these different types, direct and indirect, passive and active forms of resistance. Where did hiding take place? Well, we find a lot of different types of hiding places everywhere, including your own house or your own apartment when you were threatened with arrest. For example, people would run into a closet or under the bed or in a corner of the house or the building they were in a cellar, and also including one's own shop, an office, or an outside area. There were many outside areas near farms or in the wilderness, somewhere on the run, somewhere on the move. So anywhere could be a hiding place. And it was all, hiding took place for shorter and longer periods of time. Daphne Geismar has shown that in her book that some hiding places were used only for a day or just for one night, but it was still all hiding. So which acts and activities and elements are included when we think about going into hiding? The decision to go into hiding, what did that consist of? First of all, not reporting when called up for deportation or for work in the East. Then any form of avoiding arrest or escaping arrest. Going into hiding is usually finding a roof over your head, finding shelter, however temporary. And included are those, as I said, many improvised areas, improvised outside areas specifically, but also inside the building, there can be lots of improvised smaller spaces. In the outside areas are chicken coops, very often used, sheds and camping areas, but also holes dug in the ground. We find them not only in Eastern Europe, but also in the Netherlands, near farms or wooded areas, in the bushes, in haystacks, along the water. There's a lot of water in the Netherlands, and everywhere you see that there were little boats or ships and dikes and sluices where people were able to sometimes shelter for a little while. So hiding was often spontaneous. It was little organized. Very often it was unplanned. And at first it had to be done very quickly. And after that, hiding was very silent, very lonely and unpredictable how long it would take. It could be extremely boring and sort of empty days and empty weeks and months. But at the same time, there was this constant chance that there would be direct mortal danger. Any moment, this silent, boring, empty day could be disturbed and could be turned into a situation of immediate threat. I think that is particular, very specific for hiding. Now, to endure hiding demanded many different qualities and skills that you needed to keep it going. Now, this is a broader definition of hiding, and both in the past and in the present, and that will increase our knowledge of the numbers of Jews in hiding. I work for the Anne Frank house as well, and we know that Otto Frank was in hiding with his family and with the other family. When he came back from Auschwitz, he moved in with two of his helpers, Miep and her husband Jan, and the young child Paul. He published his daughter's hiding diary. He opened the hiding place as a museum. And Otto Frank has praised his helpers until his death in August 1980. And he has answered thousands of readers of Anne Frank's diary from all over the world. But when we look at Otto's correspondence, he has not spoken much about hiding himself. That was not a topic that he often spoke about, and yet they were in that hiding place for more than 2 years. So it is again an example of a lot of silence of survivors of hiding after the war. This quote from Otto Frank: "We cannot change what has happened anymore. The only thing we can do is to learn from the past and to realize what discrimination and persecution of innocent people means. My opinion is that everyone has the duty to fight prejudice." So that became very much Otto Frank's work after the war and after the diary had been published. But in retrospect, we can still find more information, even though there has been significant silence among survivors and also among helpers of Jews in hiding. It is possible to break that silence and to bring new knowledge about hiding together. And that is what I intend to do with the research project Mapping Hiding Places. We're building a database of knowledge of places where we know that Jews have been in hiding for longer or for shorter periods. And it is, of course, not something that one researcher can do. We need participation from many different people, and you can be included in that. And we look at hiding stories in a lot of variation. So this is a scale model of a hiding place, but hiding places, as I said, could be very, very different, very improvised. I think I've said most of this slide already. So there was not a lot of attention for hiding stories until the 1990s. And there was praise for helpers of Jews in hiding, but those helpers have remained silent too. And only now are we realizing that the small networks of non-Jews who helped Jews in hiding also remained quite silent after the war. There's a beautiful new book about Id van Dijk, for example, a young medical student of 20 years old who brought more than 100 Jewish toddlers and babies to the area of Friesland, to the province of Friesland. And she never spoke about what she did with other people than her immediate colleagues in a resistance group. So it is staggering to think that that silence continued. And we find that in different resistance groups after the war, that it was not something that was publicly spoken about. Now we are, from the 1990s onwards, we are in the age of testimony, and new collections of the voices of Jewish survivors have been built up. And I think that is a very beautiful fact, and we have to use those voices, the recordings and the testimonies that we now have, and listen to what survivors have said about hiding histories. And these, the hidden children have formed their own organizations, and they have built up very significant collections. So this is an example of an early map that I made a few years ago with some students. And then we have the students look at testimonies, and they begin to listen to a testimony, and often a survivor will say something about a hiding place. And we work together with architecture historians and students who make hiding places as a skill model. And we've made a small exhibition of that. I will show you some pictures of that later. So historian Omer Bartov from Brown University has said that we can give place a voice, and that is what we're trying to do with this project. Here are some of the models of hiding places by students of the Technical University in Eindhoven, and Dr. Hüsnü Yegenoglu, my colleague of that university, who has given his students assignments to build skill models of hiding places. This is something that we could do more also in 3D models. There are now possibilities, and looking at a model of a hiding place stimulates memory and stimulates thinking about the memory of hiding. This is a map that we made of Amsterdam just a few years ago, so that is always growing. This year, my students made a map of the Zaandam. Zaandam is an area just north of Amsterdam. And what we see, not just in the Netherlands, not just in Amsterdam, but also in Munich, for example, in Berlin, for example, in Rotterdam, is that when the pressure builds and the deportations start, Jews try to find escape in many different directions from bigger cities. And one of those areas was Zaandam. There are many other directions that you can go to from Amsterdam. So we are now finding that there were quite a few hiding places in the city of Zaandam and the villages around it. And a very active group in Zaandam has helped us with this research project. But we also find more and more hiding places used in Amsterdam. This is an example. I will just quickly go through a few examples. I will share the PowerPoint with you later so that you can have a look and read it at your own leisure. This is the main post office in Amsterdam city center, just behind Dam Square. It is now a shopping center. And here was also a hiding place just above the entrance. And the lady to the right, Renee Gompus, now lives in Sydney, and she was in hiding there. Her niece, Loes Gompus, second generation, is also involved in the project, and we gave a presentation at a synagogue 2 years ago. And whenever we talk about the project, we find that a lot of new stories are coming, because the information, the knowledge about hiding is often still in families and in private circles. Another example is here a theater, the Betty Asphalt Theater on Nieuwezijds Voorburgwal 278. It was a hiding place, was an old school, and there have been more than 100 Jews in hiding in that building, not all at the same time, just 2 at the same time. There was a secret attic compartment and a warning bell system that was used. So we go on tours, on walks sometimes, here with my friend Sandra Rottenberg, also a second generation. We did a walk, and she knows a lot of former hiding places, and there is an attempt to also make plaques, so to recognize some of the places that have been used as hiding places. We also try to have some educational projects in hiding places, and this is an example where you divide a school group and they all discover a hiding place in the city center, and then they come back to present their findings. So this is inside a hiding place where they present what they found. And we intend to develop these educational projects more as much as we can. Even with Corona it was difficult, of course, but now it is starting again. Another thing that we do is to support Holocaust survivors who are going back to hiding places. So this is an example of Heidi Cohen Rose, and she lives near Boston. And she came back to Amsterdam, to the place in Jan Evertsenstraat in Amsterdam West, where she was in hiding. And it was the shop assistant of her parents that helped to find the hiding place. And she was staying there together with her sister and her mother. So this is a picture from when they were in hiding. It was a shop. It was a liquor shop, in fact, and they were staying this ground floor of a shop. So they had to be very careful not to stand up too much, because people from the street could see them. An old-fashioned liquor store, and in the basement is where they had a few beds, and that's where they stayed. So here on the right you see Heidi Rose Cohen back in Amsterdam 2 years ago, and returning to the hiding place and talking about the hiding place. Now that place today is a pizzeria, a Turkish pizzeria, and the owner, Mr. Gulnaz, was very happy to provide this place for this particular commemoration ceremony. It was a very impressive moment. And I'm certain that we can do this in many, many more locations, because there are so many different hiding places that we can show and that we can talk about. Here are some other examples, also from Amsterdam West. In the Van Spijkstraat and in the Buske Blazerstraat. Lies Lobato and Leo Ullman were in hiding there, and they have also spoken and written about it. This was the hiding place where Leo Ullman was staying, here on the 3rd floor, on the top floor. And in a ceremony of open Jewish houses, he also went back to the hiding place and spoke about his memories and about the contacts he had with the people who helped him after the war. He has helped to support Stockton University's Holocaust Resource Center, and there's an exhibition now. In the same area, and this is by a very, very undescript, how do you say that, very bland housing projects, but we are finding more and more examples of hiding places in this area. In this street, Witte de Witstraat, we find 3 different hiding places and people who survived there. Betty Bausch is a survivor. She's still alive. She's now 102. She's been very active in resistance groups, and she's also survived in hiding. And here she's at home in her home in Israel. But also she came to a former place in Amsterdam where she lived, and here you see 3 generations together giving testimony on the location of a family home in Amsterdam. And I think this multi-generational work is something very promising and very good also for hiding histories, because there's a lot of knowledge and expertise in 3 generations, maybe even 4 generations, who can find more information about hiding places and family memory. I work together with the Hidden Child Foundation. I think they've done a fantastic job in their writing groups and in collecting testimonies of hidden children, in a support group also. And so the journal that they have, the newsletter that they have, is a very welcome source. And the Hidden Child Foundation is not the only one. There are several of these self-organizations that have built collections that we can use as sources of information. So hidden children from many different countries have written about their memories in these newsletters. And as I said, it is in the Hidden Child Foundation is one of the first journals that I've looked at, but there are more. So they have, for instance, a lot of testimonies from Belgium. Very interesting for us in the Netherlands is to compare Belgium and the Netherlands, and also the situation of Protestant country, a mostly Catholic country, whether that was different and how it was different and similar. And we also are very interested in looking at older and younger survivors in hiding, in differences between men and women in hiding, in girls and boys and their experiences. So there's a lot that we can still find out. So far we see that the female and male ratios is roughly the same in the memories collected and the testimonies collected. And we see that there are in many different areas now projects popping up where hiding places are studied and collected. So not only in the Netherlands, but also in several other big cities, we have urban and national hiding place studies emerging. So this is a growing field of study. A good example is the small town of Deventer in the Netherlands. Here, Hans van Beek has individually looked at all the different hiding places and made a collection and a beautiful website. And most of the houses were ordinary family homes where people where Jews were in hiding, but there was one special building, and it was the synagogue. So he found that 3 Jewish men had been hiding in the synagogue once it was closed. And so the stories are all on a website about hiding places used by Jews in Deventer. And there are also walking tours happening in that town. Friesland has been very important in hiding histories, and there is a great research project there too, with collecting memories, mapping hiding places there too, and also organizing intergenerational discussions. There's a project about other hiding places by 2 artists, hidden like Anne Frank. And our aim is to bring researchers together from both in the Netherlands and from different countries to exchange information to build a knowledge database. And we will collect knowledge not only about the hiding period itself, but also about the post-war period, because we know that the traumatic period of hidden children was not only during the hiding period, but also around the liberation and after the liberation. It has had a great impact. A new research project that we do is connecting hidden children with artists. And that is a project from the University of Victoria in Canada, led by Professor Charlotte Chalier. And we're making 3 graphic novels, developing them with living survivors. So the survivors are crucial in how they speak about their memories, and the artists are building the story. It is quite difficult for older survivors of hiding to think of the exact addresses where they were. because as children, as hidden children, they had to forget and they had to block out their memory. They had to forget and deny the name and the background. And so that we find that it has been quite difficult to come back to memory. But what is a new insight is that drawing of memories can stimulate memory. So again, my colleague Hüsnü Yegenoglu has shown that when you ask a survivor, and some of you may be involved in projects like this, if you're interviewing a survivor, talking with a survivor, you can ask them, well, take a piece of paper and could you draw that hiding place? Do you remember what it looked like? And putting a pencil on paper and talking can often bring back part of a memory. So here is Gilad Seliktar, who's an Israeli graphic artist, and he's making this graphic novel together with Nico and Rolf Kamp, two Jewish survivors who were in hiding in 13 different places in the Netherlands near Amersfoort. And here, so you see here, Rolf is drawing from memory, and here we are visiting a farm where they were in hiding for more than a year. There's also a beautiful film about this already. I will show you some some of the new maps. This is a map of places in Amsterdam where Jews in hiding were arrested. And then we can find out that, you know, within a few months after that, most of them had been deported. Here are some maps of German hiding places that I hope to develop that further. So Belgium is important for my project, France, of course, but Germany is also very promising and a lot to do still. Frankfurt and Berlin. This is an example of a new book just out by Gerben Post about a family who were very active in helping Jews in hiding in Amsterdam. They were students and they were very good at falsifying identity cards. And the student home is still there. And here you see them active. The sister Lydia was specializing in making false papers. So that was a crucial quality, a crucial skill. And Ivo Schöffer he said, as the boss of a hiding place, you had to be very strict. So they were doing these trainings that the Jews who were in hiding in that student home had to wake up in the middle of the night and then run to the secret area they had in that student home. And they had to practice again and again until they could do it in 2 minutes. So this is an example of a very recent book with memories about that particular place. Now here's a new map that I've made for this occasion. So Daphne, I hope that I promised that I would do that, and I'm very happy to present it here for the first time. So this is a map for Daphne Geismar of her book, Invisible Years, published last year. And I've made a story map of the story of the hiding places in Daphne's book, but also opened. This is an open map. If you go to one of these links, you can see the map, and you can click on every dot, and then you will see who of the family of Daphne were in hiding in these places. And now it is an open map, so Daphne, you can continue to work with this map, and then so you can put it on your website, and you have a digital version of the map that you made for your book. One of the hiding places in Daphne's book is a wallpaper factory in Amsterdam, and I was wondering which wallpaper factory would it be. I found these old pictures of a wallpaper factory, and it could be that this wallpaper factory was one of the hiding places of one of the families. So there are options to continue. Sometimes you have an address, or you have part of an address, and you can always continue the research, and then you can put it on paper. So that's the good thing about digital maps. It is fluid, and it can be you can always add information to it. Also, I found that the information in Invisible Years is now without most of the house numbers of all the addresses of hiding, but with information from the population registers, you can add that information. So you can make it more complete, and then you could add pictures of the houses where hiding took place. So it brings it and makes it more complete and even better to imagine. And in all those places, there are, of course, now students and schools. Another type of brand new research that I want to share with you tonight is what we are doing with the Showa Foundation testimonies, you know, the interviews in the 1990s. Before every interview, there was a pre-interview questionnaire. So that is a paper form. And Jan-Erik Dubbelman, my husband, and Robbie Dubbelman, my youngest son, is helping with this research. And we are studying these interview forms and finding out how many people speak about hiding. And we are quite surprised that of the first almost 400 interviews that we've now looked at, 70% contain episodes of hiding. So hiding is everywhere. There are so many hiding stories. So many people have had an episode of hiding as survivors. And there are more or less equal number of men and women. And so far there are about 2 to 3 hiding places per person. So we see that the importance of hiding is very overwhelming in what we've seen so far. And we also see that quite a few people have survived in hiding. So here again, 71% has been in hiding. Our first impression of this first part of those pre-interview questionnaires is very convincing of that hiding has been an important story. So that is my summary for today. The history of hiding is not a small element in the history of the Shoah, but it deserves recognition as a big story of which we know far too little yet. And it is time to include all the testimony collections that have been built up in the last 30 to 50 years, and to include the perspective and the voice of survivors and their families. And it will mean that we can then recalculate and also reinterpret what hiding consisted of and how often it took place. So 70%, what we're now finding, is a large majority. And then we can do new things as well. I gave a talk 2 weeks ago to a group of survivors for the Dutch organization of Yad Vashem. And they were in the audience was beginning to compare surviving in hiding with surviving in the camps. I think we've always thought that surviving the camps was worse than surviving in hiding. But here I heard for the first time a different remarks. So who had more agency as a survivor? So there has been in hiding a lot of fear and a lot of unrecognized and significant suffering and trauma. So I think that comparison we will continue to work on that. Similarly, we can also ask questions about how do we compare helping Jews in hiding with other forms of resistance, because we see so much post-war silence in these former resistance groups that it is an interesting question why that is and how that happened. So these are some new questions that we want to take on. We're building a website. We're organizing a conference, and there will be some more conferences next year. One is in Athens in May next year. The comparison between Greece and the Netherlands is also quite interesting. But I'm also very interested in Poland and in other European countries. We're developing educational tours. And I want to end by showing you something very new, a new way of going digitally into a former hiding place with Aaron Petre. So Aaron is here, and if you have questions about this project, you can have a look at it. So I will stop sharing my screen and show what this is about, and then show you, if I have a little bit of time, can still.
You have like 1 or 2 minutes. So
Yes, I realize that I'm talking a lot, but this is too good not to show. So this app is called Lapentor, and this is a hiding place in the city of Zeist. So with Lapentor, you can add and add on if you're there. Maybe you can unmute and add your information. So with a 360-degree camera, you can make these pictures, and then you can go into a hiding place and make these recordings, and it brings you into hiding place. So this hiding place that we're going to see is still completely intact, 76 years after the war. So a Jewish couple and family have used this hiding place, and the people who live there now have always kept it intact. So you can look around, so, and it's 360 degrees, so you can go in all different directions, and you can go back up. Yeah. So I wanted to show you this as a new form, Lapentor, and you can make it into a tour as well. Okay, so I think I will stop with the last slides, just showing you a possibility to help us, because this is all ongoing research, of course. Your information is quite welcome. Please put your questions or remarks in the chat. I'm writing a book about hiding in and around Amsterdam. The database is international and is all over Europe. And also, if you have only partial information, it is very welcome. And here are our email addresses that you can send information to. Thank you.
Thank you, Dienke. And you can put your 2 emails in the chat box for our for everyone.
Yes, yes,
that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for such an enlightening presentation. I heard your presentation a few years ago, and it's it's growing. Yeah. So I'm so glad that we had an opportunity to hear all the new projects as well, also including the younger generation and students to take part in this project. And now we're going to move on to our next speaker, Professor Kiene Brillenburg Wurth. And Professor Brillenburg Wurth is a professor of comparative literature at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. She has been interested in music and stories since an early age, especially the stories told by her father about the war. She has written and edited books on music and music philosophy, experimental writing, cinema and creativity, and teaches about various subjects such as world literature, literature and philosophy, literature and human rights, and intergenerational trauma. And intergenerational trauma will also be the topic of her talk, and I don't want to give away too much what she's going to be talking about, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madine, for having me, and thank you, Daphne, Sharon, and Hadassah for inviting me. Brings me back to the years that we were having, we were in touch in the US and in Holland, which is so precious to me and to my sisters and my cousins. Okay, I will now share my screen. I'm not really anymore talking about intergenerational trauma. No, that always happens. I'm talking about a sermon. I'm going to close read our grandparents. And I wanted to add to Dienke's wonderful presentation that the real point about my presentation is fighting discrimination, racism, and exclusion doesn't only involve fighting prejudice, but also fighting ignorance, which also involves historical ignorance. And this is partly what I will cover in my talk. So there we go. I'm going to share. And play. Okay. So, Daphne's beautiful book, co-created with Sharon and Hadassah on their family in hiding, is a tribute to their existence. It attests to their lives and death during Nazi occupation in Holland. It's a drawer, an archive unfolding before us as we join the journey the authors of the book have made. And out of this drawer, many different voices emerge. They share their memories or mark their death. If lives resisted and survived in hiding, a space of death opened between them all the time, filled with endless lists of names. None of these lives ever asked to be oppressed, haunted, branded, outcast, and mass murdered. Some of them, I, like my sisters and my cousins, have known all my life. Chaim and Fifi de Zoete Polak and their daughters Miriam, Hadassah, and Judith. These names were like little clouds hanging in the air as we grew up. Often I pointed at them, asking our dad or his favorite sister Mia to touch and talk about them. About the years in hiding in the Breeplein Church in Rotterdam of their father, Reverend Brillenburg Wurth, and the fearless, brave sexton Jacob de Mars. Their life stories and those of the other two couples hiding in the church reverberated in our house and the house of my cousins. So, just to give you an example, we heard stories about the raid, the razzia on the church just before the end of the war, how scary that must have been. We heard about a vicious neighbor asking my grandmother, "What are you doing every day bringing food into the church?" Or we heard about the killing of 30 hostages that my father had to witness 2 months before the end of the war. Another famous story that the mayor also referred to was told long after our grandparents were dead, to us, I mean, by the best friend of our grandmother, Tante Riek, Aunt Riek. And she told us about baby Emile. On a cold winter night, early January 1943, Emile was born to Rebecca and Maurice Kool, the youngest of the 3 couples hiding in the attics behind the organ. Aiding them was a Suriname doctor, Dr. Leo Leslie, who was the only doctor in the Christian resistance community willing to do so, the Reverend Wurth's wife Gerda, and Tante Riek, and both of them were whispered to have been in love. Imagine the situation in that dark, cold attic, passing on existence in limbo, a heterotopia where discriminated and haunted people welcomed a new life. Daphne's book offers her family's letters and written testimonies. She has material to work with, but we had nothing much to offer her, except some pictures. There was indeed a lot of silence, as Dienke already told you. There were no letters. There were no memoirs from our grandparents about what had happened during the war. Sometimes we could catch a glimpse of them in the memoirs of Chaim and Fifi that were reproduced in Daphne's book. For instance, when Chaim and Fifi first meet Reverend Wurth, and here he is with his wife, Fifi reports how encouragingly he had looked at them as they had asked him for help, their last resource, and how radiant, as he is on this picture, how radiant he seemed when he had found them a safe place. And this is reproduced on page 93. He must have been very glad as he is on this very nice picture. Well, it's not that we don't have any stories about our grandfather. In many anecdotes, he emerges as a lovable, chaotic, and enthusiastic man, legendary in his distractedness and forgetfulness. He seemed very generous, a real helper for the people in his parish, especially for the poor and helpless. He was also innovative in his profession, an interdisciplinary thinker who integrated theology, psychology, and sociology to improve care for patients with terminal disease. Yet we could never ever find a text written by him, his wife, or their intimate friend Riek on their experiences during the war. Now, however, a text has emerged. Only a few weeks ago, Anja Matser, who has written one of the first books about the hiding places behind the organ in Rotterdam, discovered a sermon by our grandfather, Reverend Brillenburg Wurth, delivered one day after the liberation on May 6, 1945. It was part of a double performance on freedom. The first sermon delivered by Reverend van Andel, the second by Wurth. Both are pretty stern sermons in the tradition of the Dutch Reformed Protestant Church. The first one stressing the frailty, gullibility, and cowardice of most of the Dutch during the war, so that most of the Dutch Jews, as Dienke just showed, were deported and murdered. After the war, the surviving Dutch Jews never, and rightfully so, trusted the Dutch again. Anja Matser told me that as open as our grandfather had been towards others, as deft and complex were his sermons. They were generally not understood. His liberation sermon, entitled A Call to Freedom, is certainly a very, very dense text. It layers and interweaves different ideas and lines of thinking on freedom, and then thinks about the applications of applying them to concrete situations. The question that he raises is, how should humans act in relation to each other, feel towards each other, especially when freedom has been regained? What does freedom mean after years of oppression? Does it mean you can do whatever you want, take your liberty, or does it mean something else, that you have an obligation? For him, and I thought this was nice, freedom is an obligation from the heart to reach out to others. His ideal was clearly with the community, not the individual. And I was very pleased to even detect some communism in his text. So his sermon proposes that freedom is a call to duty, a felt necessity or impulse, and our grandfather seems to have been very impulsive, to help others. It is about love and communal care. As the spiritual somehow resonates in all of us, we have an obligation towards the other. So I think it's a beautiful message. I even try to read it as a testimony or an explanation for his support to Jewish resistance during the war. So finally, we have a voice here. Why he did what he did. Because towards the end of his sermon, he rather cryptically states, God asking us to love comes to us through the others, the fellow beings he puts on our path. Are these, I of course wonder, Chaim, Fifi, the sexton, and the two other couples hiding in the church? So that it is these others that allowed him to practice his freedom, rather than him acting bravely as the hero. And isn't it a very new and nice way of thinking of resisting the Nazis in terms of practicing your freedom through others, rather than stressing your ego in this matter. So I was happy with this, to find this sermon, to find his voice, but I was also very unhappy with this sermon. I was confused by it and I didn't understand something about it. It gave me a hard time as I read it first. The reason for this, well, Reverend Wurth uses a text in his sermon to make his point about freedom from oppression, and that is part of Paul's letter to the Galatians in the New Testament. As many Protestants will know, this letter has been erased from the Christian canon in the meantime, as it breathes an anti-Judaic theology. Although this is still the subject of heated debate amongst theologians. So it's not like decided that it is anti-Judaic, but the problem is that in the history of the Protestant faith, Martin Luther, one of the founders of Protestant faith, used and abused this text by Paul to formulate and spread an anti-Judaic theology in the 16th century. Worse, in an ugly little pamphlet called The Jews and Their Lies from 1543, he demonized the Jews and called for their conversion before the end of times. Why? So that all Christians, including the converted ones, could enter heaven. Only then could the kingdom of God open. It's unbelievable that people really believe this stuff for centuries. If they did not convert, they were to be thrown out of town, or, as we know, worse. And of course, all the Jews had been thrown out of Wittenberg, where Luther lived before the 15th century. Like many other Christian and Catholic thinkers before him, such as the hallowed Saint Augustine, Luther preached a so-called and very dangerous replacement theology. With the incarnation of God in Christ, they argued, the Christians had replaced the Jews as God's people. The latter had no place before God anymore unless they professed or were forced to profess their faith in Christ. In the Netherlands, this matter of converting the Jews was especially an issue became even more so an issue in the 19th century, when Judaism ceased to be a separate nation, when the Jews ceased to be a separate nation in the Netherlands and became like a religion alongside Protestantism, which was the main religion in the Netherlands. Orthodox Protestants, and my grandfather was not by any means an Orthodox Protestant, couldn't really take this and started doing missionary work among the Jews, really believing they were saving and helping them. This continued well into the 20th century, while the desire to convert Jews among Orthodox Protestants even continued into the 21st. And to be precise, until like 5 years ago, Orthodox publishers would still distribute children's literature about Jewish children wanting to be converted amongst their people, as Ewart Sanders has shown. So, it's a long way to go from this reference that my grandfather makes to Paul, the letter to the Galatians, but it's a burdened text because of the link to Luther. And we all know Hitler willingly made use of Luther in his rise to power, and the majority of Protestants in Germany followed him. At the same time, however, Luther's other writings precisely inspired Protestants in Germany to resist Nazism. And the same applies in Holland. Orthodox Protestants had been dedicated missionaries hanging around synagogues to convert the Jews. But Reformed Protestants, to which my grandfather belonged, would also become healers of hurt brought about by the Nazis during the occupation. So, anti-Judaic theologies may not be automatically extended to anti-Semitism in the Netherlands or in Germany, but it certainly served as a legitimization for anti-Semitism and a dangerous breeding ground for it, as historians have shown. And we can observe the same with respect to the history of slavery, where Christianity served as a legitimization. So all this is, raised my question, because I have some historical knowledge about this issue. What did he do? Why did he choose this text with the three couples present in the church? I'm sure he didn't use it to convert the three couples in the church. But so what did he want to convey with his text? What would they have, and what would they have felt just after liberation, hearing his referring to that text? Would they have thought, does he think following Christ is better than observing Judaic law? Or was he merely invoking the idea of the law to refer to the law that had been imposed on the Dutch during the war and the freedom to resist that? I'm inclined to believe the latter. One way or another, however, it was a very misguided comparison. The Jewish law, which I see some parallels with the Buddhist scriptures, precisely serves the purpose of living well with one another, in the present, in the here and now, rather than saving humanity for some kind of imaginary future in the kingdom of God to come. Still, to conclude, as misguided as his choice is here in his sermon, just as adequate was his choice he made in 1943. When Fifi and Chaim first met our grandfather, they also met another reverend, Reverend Bakker, who was doing missionary work amongst the Jews. While our grandfathers said nothing when they asked for help and went out to find a first hiding place for them, Reverend Bakker stayed and started judging the helpless, fragile couple. He talked and talked and talked, Fifi reports in Daphne's book, and, visibly pleased to say so, concluded that Zionism equaled fascism. It's really unbelievable. I quote Chaim now, who reflects on the same encounter. Reverend Bakker, a leader of the mission among the Jews, entered upon a debate on Zionism, which he placed on the same line as fascism. Reverend Wurth, however, understood our peril, as the next day was the day on which every Jew who, until then, had escaped deportation had to disappear. And try to imagine them. This encounter, the mere profession of Reverend Bakker, reveals the precarity of the Jews in a country with a Protestant denomination and a Catholic majority. Fortunately, Reverend Wurth, who was neither missionary nor Orthodox Protestant, acted out of compassion instead of any ideology. In the years to come, lucky him, he would be spending many an interesting philosophical hour with Chaim in the church. I have no doubt they talked a lot about love, freedom, and obligation, which is, after all, a very Jewish concept, without which our grandfather's idea of freedom would have missed its essential ingredient, namely the urgency to act. And that's my conclusion. Thank you for your attention. Oh,
yeah, you can unshare.
Yeah.
There we are. Wonderful. Thank you, Kiene, for your look at this sermon. It's so interesting because you actually come from that field of literature, so it actually made your presentation very interesting coming from that point of view as well, and also adding something new to our understanding the day after liberation to, you know, contemplate what did I actually do and what does it all mean when you have so much silence and you have this written and it was printed. So that's incredible.
Yeah.
It's very, very late, but I do want to acknowledge that we have a few stories of survivor families. Michelle Bukai, who I personally know, and I'm so glad that she came, talked about her family that went into hiding in the Netherlands, and also Alice, I can't pronounce her last name, Nagas, I think, also mentioned that her family went to hiding. And the chat is filled with questions, but I do want to say one thing, that many of our people in the audience are asking for the sources, the resources that you talked about. So some people put in the books and the references and the links, but if, Ken, if you have any other resources that you want to add, the chat before we close, that would be wonderful. Someone actually asked a very interesting question about the hidden children. Were the hidden children only Jewish, or were they mostly Jewish? I guess it's a question for Dienke, asking about the hidden children.
They were all Jewish. I'm only looking at
Right.
Jewish survivors and Jews in hiding, but also at Roma and Sinti. I found a beautiful story here in my neighborhood in the city center of Amsterdam, where a Sinti woman with her granddaughter was interviewed, and there was a hiding place here in the Jordan where she stayed. It's now a hairdresser salon, and she was living under the floor. So I'm sure that we will find more of those stories too.
I imagine so. I'm trying to think. There was another question about it's something, I guess, from the beginning of your talk, Dienke, about the hierarchy among survivor families, and what was that based on?
Well, it appears that there was a kind of competition of suffering among survivors, and that people who had been to the camps in Poland say, well, you have no idea what we went through. And then somehow that was considered to be so much worse that it had a silencing effect on people who had been in hiding. Say, well, you had it easy. That was the sort of general idea, and that creates a kind of hierarchy in a family, in a group of friends. Then when you have a reaction like that, then you don't talk anymore. But yeah, that type of hierarchy, and it is something that survivors have spoken about, and yeah, now that most of the survivors of the camps have died, there comes more room for the survivors of hiding to tell their stories.
I think it's actually fascinating that there was so much silence, and that it's the younger generations that are kind of picking up the responsibility to get everything out. And I see that people are writing that, you know, I know my family saved people, but they actually were illiterate and they couldn't write down what they were doing. So we even have stories like that in our audience today. So it's very important that we have you and Kiene working to get these stories out. I'm just looking to see if there were any other questions that I wrote down. Actually, there was a question about the range of hiding places. I think, Dienke, you did answer this question. Someone asked, Caroline asked, if there was a different type of hiding place where there may be one place that became like a central station of hiding where a lot of people went through, and maybe other types of places that only had one person or one family. If you can, different types of hiding places. I think you talked about that in your presentation. That actually,
yeah, what we find out more and more, that some places were used very as temporary hiding places, so sort of transfer to other places just temporarily. And we also see that in some parts of Amsterdam, housing was temporary. So Jews were deported from a house, and then later another Jewish family was housed there, and they were also deported. But then they were also using houses more often as hiding places. And then, yeah, I have no overview of that yet. So we're only gathering all these stories, and every story is welcome.
Wonderful. And I'm just going to ask our audience if anybody wants to write in the chat if there's anything you want to ask Kiene about her presentation as well. I've also put in the link for our YouTube channel for those that are interested in a recording. It'll be available within a few days. I know there are a lot of people that want to either watch again or weren't able to attend today. So we have that available as well. And I see that Daphne is also adding the links to purchase the book, which I have here always next to me. And I want to ask the family, the Geismar descendants, if there's anything that you'd like to say before we say goodbye to our audience, because we do have you here with us today.
Hi, Medine. This is Adasa. And next to me, there is Judith, my mother. I hope you can see her.
We're going to try to spotlight you now. There you go.
One, I will put the camera. This is my mother, Judith.
Hello,
and
Judith.
The daughter of Chaim and Fifi de Zute, who Kiene just told everyone about their hiding in the church, in the Belkrieg Church. I would like to say that it was very interesting hearing both of you, Dienke and Kiene, and thank you very much from all of us in our family. And I would like to say that Kiene grandparents hid my grandparents, or my mother's parents, Chaim and Fifi, and we are so excited to hear the point of view of the family of the hiders, the very brave people who hid my grandparents. It is such a complex situation, and it is so interesting to hear this side of the story, which is seldom told, because it is for sure something very good that they did, standing up and hiding the people who need this hiding place. But we do understand that it is a very complex situation for them, their family, who was endangered because of this bravery act. And I think it was very interesting to hear Kiene talking about a little bit of this complicity. And probably there is a lot more to tell about being in that side of the story. We know our side, but that side is very, very complex, I assume, and can think about it. And also I saw Gentine is also here in the audience, Gentine, who is Kiene's sister.
Yes.
So I just wanted to say that it was very interesting hearing you're talking about it, and it is very appreciated to see the complex point of view that some of it was brought up by you in this conversation.
Thank you. That's very precious to me. And thank you, Judith. It's so wonderful to see you again.
I added a link to the Organ Addicts website, and I think there's also a way to hopefully after Corona and COVID, we'll be able to travel again and to visit, and like Dienke was talking about, do these tours as well, because people were asking in the chat if you're able to visit these places, and this is happening. So I put that link in as well, the Organ Addicts, and it's in English, and of course it's also in Dutch, so people can get information about that as well. And I can hardly wait to make that trip, I hope in the near future. So first of all, I want to thank our two speakers for coming and talking with us today and sharing information. People are so appreciative of the information. Many people do not know a lot about hiding in the Netherlands, and how complex it was, and how it was very much widespread. Somebody actually asked how many people went into hiding. Robert Jan van Pelt talked about that the last time. I'm going to throw out a number. Over 30,000 people went into hiding, and many survived, like someone wrote, because they were in hiding, which is so rare in the Netherlands. And I also want to thank the Zute descendants for being with us, and especially Judith to be with us today. And of course, I want to thank our incredible audience that came today and asked questions and was very interested, and hope to see everybody in another month on December 5th for our last and third program in this series. So I want to say shalom to everyone and see you soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for all your questions, and we'll try to answer them. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.